July 1945. Temporary Field Hospital, Northern Okinawa. The young Japanese nurse dropped to her knees before the approaching British soldier, hands trembling as she pressed her forehead to the dirt. "Please kill us quickly," she begged in broken English, learned during 3 years of military nursing training. No torture. Quick death only. Around her, 11 other Japanese nursing corps members assumed identical positions, their white uniforms stained with the mud and blood of retreat, their voices joining in a desperate chorus for merciful execution. The British corporal, a lanky Yorkshire man who had survived the North African campaign before transfer to the Pacific Theatre, paused in confusion. His unit had been sweeping abandoned Japanese positions when they discovered the medical personnel hiding in a partially destroyed field hospital. He carried no execution orders. In fact, His Majesty's forces operated under strict instructions regarding enemy medical staff. After a moment's hesitation, he reached into his pack and extracted his canteen, a tin of biscuits, and a small sachet of tea leaves. "Would you like a cup of tea, miss?" he asked, his voice deliberately gentle. The question, incomprehensible within the framework of Imperial Japanese propaganda, might as well have been spoken in an alien language. The nurse, Yumiko Tanaka, aged 23, remained frozen, waiting for the bayonet thrust that Imperial training had assured her would follow capture by the barbaric foreign devils. Across the Pacific Theatre between 1943 and 1945, approximately 2,700 Japanese military nurses would experience this same cognitive disconnect. Raised on Imperial propaganda that guaranteed Allied forces would rape, torture, and mutilate prisoners, particularly women, these medical professionals discovered instead British soldiers who offered tea, medical supplies, and treatment according to international conventions their own forces often ignored. This fundamental contradiction between expectation and reality would initiate a psychological transformation as profound as that experienced by German prisoners in American camps. Military records from the British 14th Army document the systematic protocol established for captured enemy medical personnel. Standard procedure included immediate identification as protected persons under the Geneva Convention, provision of quarter-pound tea rations, 4 ounces of powdered milk, 8 ounces of sugar, and standard British Army biscuits. These modest provisions represented the first step in a deliberate reorientation process that utilised distinctly British cultural rituals rather than formal re-education. The Japanese nursing corps, trained at imperial nursing schools in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, had received specific instruction on proper behaviour if captured. Imperial Military Directive 417B, dated March 1943, stated, "Medical personnel will maintain Japanese honour through self-termination before capture. If capture proves unavoidable, they will reveal nothing beyond name and rank while awaiting execution." Copies of this directive were recovered from the pockets of 3 nurses at the Okinawa Field Hospital. They had followed protocol precisely until the final step, the suicide their training demanded. Their failure to die before capture generated shame so profound that execution seemed the only honourable outcome. The British corporal's tin contained 6 McVitie's digestive biscuits, standard issue in British supplemental ration packs since 1944. These simple wheat biscuits, manufactured in Edinburgh and shipped 11,000 miles to the Pacific Theatre, represented nothing special to the British soldier. To the Japanese nurses, who had subsisted on 1,200 calories daily for months, primarily rice and occasionally dried fish, these biscuits, served freely to enemy personnel, represented impossible contradiction. Imperial propaganda had described starving British forces reduced to cannibalism. Yet here were standardized, professionally manufactured biscuits offered casually to the enemy. Historical records confirm the initial interaction lasted approximately 40 minutes. The British soldier, following standard procedure for treatment of enemy medical personnel, established a small fire, boiled water in his canteen cup, and prepared tea precisely as he would have in Yorkshire. He added the standard army ration of milk powder and 2 sugar cubes. The resulting cup, strong black tea lightened with powdered milk and sweetened, he offered to the still kneeling nurse. The scent of the tea, described in Tanaka's subsequent diary as foreign but comforting, created the first crack in imperial conditioning. When no execution followed, when no torture materialized, when the expected barbarism transformed instead into this incomprehensible ritual involving hot, sweetened liquid and wheat biscuits, Nurse Tanaka experienced what psychiatrists would later term acute cognitive dissonance. Her worldview, constructed through years of imperial education, contained no framework for enemy kindness. The British soldiers' simple act of brewing tea had initiated an ideological crisis more effective than any propaganda speech. Throughout that afternoon, as additional British medical personnel arrived and established treatment protocols, the Japanese nurses watched with increasing confusion as their own wounded received the same care as British casualties. Military medical records document that identical supplies were allocated regardless of uniform. The same sulfur powder, the same bandages, the same morphine dosages when available. This equality of treatment, particularly after months of severe Japanese medical supply shortages, seemed more alien than the foreign faces of their captors. By evening, the 11 surviving Japanese nurses had been relocated to a British field hospital 2 miles behind the front lines. There, the contrasts intensified. British Army records show the facility maintained a daily per-patient supply of clean bandages weighing approximately 6 ounces, more medical cotton than the entire Japanese field hospital had received in its final month of operation. The nurses observed electric lighting powered by portable generators, refrigerated blood plasma, and penicillin stores, medical luxuries that most had only read about but never seen during their service. That first night in British captivity, Nurse Tanaka made her initial diary entry on paper provided by a British nursing sister. "They have not killed us. They have given us food, tea, and clean bedding. Nothing in my training explains this. I wait for the horror to begin, but they treat us as honored colleagues rather than enemies. Everything we were told appears false. What else might be untrue?" Imperial Nursing Academy, Tokyo, 1943. Lieutenant Hiroshi Takeda paced before 30 nursing students, his uniform immaculate despite Tokyo's summer heat. "The foreign devils will show no mercy," he declared, striking the chalkboard where anatomical diagrams illustrated vulnerable points for bayonet strikes. "The Americans shoot prisoners after interrogation. The British," he paused for emphasis, "prefer slow death through starvation and medical experimentation." Students dutifully recorded these assertions in notebooks that would accompany them to field hospitals across the Pacific. This specialized indoctrination, documented in recovered training manuals, represented years of systematic psychological preparation. Japanese military archives, seized during occupation, reveal that medical personnel received 120 hours of ideological training beyond standard imperial education. The curriculum included manipulated photographs purporting to show Allied atrocities, testimonials fabricated from alleged witnesses, and detailed descriptions of torture techniques supposedly favored by different Allied forces. The British, according to these materials, were portrayed as particularly sadistic due to their colonial experience. Training document JN 471, titled Characteristics of British Interrogation Methods, claimed, "The British have refined torture techniques through centuries of colonial occupation. They derive pleasure from prolonged suffering, particularly of educated prisoners and women. Death will come only after days of agony." This document was standard reading for all medical personnel deployed to areas where British capture was possible. Lieutenant Mariko Hayashi, senior nursing instructor at Tokyo Imperial Hospital, expanded this training with women-specific warnings. British colonial forces consider Asian women subhuman. Capture means repeated violation by multiple soldiers, followed by mutilation. Your medical knowledge makes you valuable for their experimentation programs. They will keep you alive until your usefulness ends. When recovered from a training facility in 1946, attendance logs showed 3,400 nursing students had received this specific lecture between 1942 and 1945. The Japanese military code left no ambiguity regarding capture. The Field Service Code distributed to all personnel stated, "Never live to experience the shame of capture. If you are about to be captured, take your own life using whatever means available." For medical personnel, particularly women, this directive was emphasized with additional specificity. Each nurse received a cyanide capsule with formal instructions for its use. Military records indicate 601 Japanese nurses chose suicide over capture during the Pacific Campaign. This conditioning collided with an entirely different tradition among British forces. The British Army Medical Corps operated under principles established in 1898 and refined through 2 world wars. General Order M7, standard in all British medical units, stated, "Enemy medical personnel will be accorded full protection under Geneva Convention provisions, treated with professional courtesy, and incorporated into treatment protocols when possible." This approach wasn't merely humanitarian but practical. Additional medical staff, regardless of nationality, could save Allied lives. The British ritual of tea, seemingly trivial in military context, carried profound cultural significance that British commanders understood and deliberately employed. Captain William Montgomery, British medical officer in Burma, documented in his field journal. The offering of tea serves multiple functions. It establishes non-hostile intent, creates familiar routine in chaos, and provides hydration and small caloric intake. Most importantly, it demonstrates normal human interaction when enemies expect monstrosity. British field hospitals stockpiled tea even when medical supplies ran short, recognizing its value extended beyond nutrition to psychological operations. The 8th British Field Hospital on Okinawa maintained tea supplies sufficient for 15,000 cups monthly, approximately 75 pounds of loose tea leaves, 150 pounds of sugar, and 200 pounds of powdered milk. These provisions represented substantial shipping capacity in a supply chain stretched across thousands of miles, indicating the strategic importance assigned to this seemingly mundane comfort. Medical Captain Thomas Blackwood, who supervised the integration of captured Japanese medical personnel on Okinawa, recorded his methodology. "When they arrive expecting execution, we offer tea. When they anticipate torture, we provide medical textbooks. When they expect starvation, we establish shared meals. Each contradicted expectation creates space for cognitive re-evaluation." His approach, replicated across British medical installations, achieved documented success. Records indicate 87% of captured Japanese medical personnel voluntarily participated in treatment programs within 72 hours of capture, despite standing orders forbidding cooperation with enemy forces. Lieutenant Yuriko Matsuda, captured on Luzon in January 1945, described this contradiction in a diary recovered during repatriation processing. "We were trained to believe the British would extract our fingernails while questioning us about military information we do not possess. Instead, they asked about our medical training and specialties, then assigned us to wards matching our experience. They consulted our opinions on treatment protocols. The cognitive gap between expectation and reality grows daily." The Japanese medical hierarchy had established specific behavioral requirements under capture. Training Manual JN 519 prescribed, "Maintain silence except for name and rank. Resist all attempts at friendly conversation. Accept no food or drink that might contain truth serums. Sabotage enemy medical efforts when possible without detection." Evidence of this training appeared in the initial behavior of all captured Japanese nursing groups, but British records document the average compliance duration lasted only 4.3 days before pragmatic cooperation began. British nurses played crucial roles in this transformation. Sister Margaret Wellington, Royal Army Nursing Corps, stationed on Okinawa, recorded, "The Japanese nurses initially flinch when I approach. They expect violence from everyone in uniform. I demonstrate procedures alongside them, share the same risks, eat the same food. When they observe British nursing sisters treated with professional respect by male officers, another layer of imperial indoctrination falters. This cross-cultural female professional interaction, unimaginable in imperial Japanese military structure, provided particularly effective counter-propaganda. By August 1945, as Japan's surrender appeared increasingly inevitable, British medical commands implemented expanded integration protocols. Medical Directive 147P established Japanese nursing personnel will participate in all professional development sessions, receive equal access to medical literature, and be incorporated into treatment teams under appropriate supervision. This directive, implemented at 14 field hospitals across the Pacific Theater, formalized the transition from enemy captives to professional colleagues that had already begun through informal tea rituals and shared medical ethics. Morning rounds, 8th British Field Hospital, Okinawa, September 1945. Former Imperial Army nurse Yumiko Tanaka stood beside British sister Margaret Wellington, changing bandages on a young British private. Their hands moved in synchronized efficiency, the Japanese nurse holding the wound edges closed, while the British nurse applied sulfur powder and fresh gauze. No translation was required. Medical necessity had established its own universal language. Across the 400-bed facility, similar partnerships had formed, former enemies now linked through shared professional purpose. This medical reciprocity represented the most effective bridge between cultures. British medical records document that by September 1945, 94% of captured Japanese nursing personnel were actively participating in patient care. Captain Harold Mitchell, Chief Medical Officer, noted in his weekly report, "The Japanese nurses now approach their duties with the same dedication shown to their own wounded. Professional ethics have transcended national boundaries more effectively than any direct propaganda could achieve." The daily schedule established clear routine. Morning rounds began at 600 hours, with mixed British-Japanese teams assigned to specific wards. Breakfast followed at 800, typically tea, powdered eggs, toast with margarine and marmalade, shared equally among all medical staff regardless of nationality. Japanese nurses, accustomed to rice even at breakfast, initially struggled with unfamiliar foods, but appreciated portions 3 times larger than imperial rations had provided during the war's final months. British medical supply chains stretched back to Australia, India, and ultimately the United Kingdom itself. Weekly inventory reports show each field hospital received standardized shipments: 400 pounds of gauze bandages, 200 pounds of cotton batting, 50 gallons of alcohol, 20 pounds of sulfur powder, 100 units of penicillin when available. These quantities, while considered inadequate by British standards, dwarfed the supplies Japanese medical units had received in the war's final year. Japanese nurses witnessed medical abundance they had been told was impossible. Nurse Reiko Watanabe, captured on Leyte, wrote in a letter, intercepted and translated by British intelligence, "Each British patient receives a complete bandage change daily. We were reusing bandages after boiling them until they fell apart. They have sulfanilamide powder for every wound. We had been diluting our remaining supply with talcum powder for months. Their abundance makes me question everything we were told about Allied supply shortages." The stark contrast extended to treatment protocols. British field hospitals maintained a standard 1:12 nurse-to-patient ratio, allowing for individualized care. Japanese field hospitals in the war's final months operated with ratios exceeding 150. British facilities changed wound dressings daily. Japanese nurses had been instructed to change dressings only when visibly soaked through. British patients received 2,800 daily calories during recovery. Japanese military hospitals had been limited to 1,600 calories per patient in 1945. This medical reality directly contradicted years of propaganda. Lieutenant Keiko Sato, senior nurse captured at Okinawa, recorded her observations. "We were told British doctors experimented on prisoners. Instead, I watched them treat Japanese and British wounded with identical protocols. We were told they would steal our blood for their own wounded. Instead, they maintain careful records and ensure proportionate distribution of limited plasma supplies. The lies we believed now shame me." British military medicine had evolved through 2 world wars and colonial service. The Royal Army Medical Corps maintained standardized treatment protocols documented in field manuals translated into 8 languages. When Japanese nurses were given copies of these manuals in September 1945, they discovered medical knowledge their isolated medical system had been denied through years of increasing international isolation. Case records document specific instances of medical cooperation. Private Thomas Jenkins, wounded by artillery fire on August 14, 1945, suffered from gas gangrene in his left leg. The British surgeon performing debridement was assisted by Japanese nurse Michiko Yamamoto, who had extensive experience with anaerobic infections from her service in the Philippines. Her suggestion to modify the standard British protocol for wound irrigation with higher alcohol concentration was adopted, documented, and subsequently incorporated into treatment guidelines. The private's leg was saved. This professional respect occurred despite significant language barriers. Captain William Boyd, medical documentation officer, recorded that medical teams developed hybrid communication systems combining English medical terminology, Japanese counting, and elaborate hand gestures. One Japanese nurse maintained a notebook containing 147 essential English medical terms and their Japanese equivalents. A document later published as the first modern Japanese-English medical dictionary in 1949. British supplies, while far exceeding Japanese equivalents, still faced wartime limitations. Weekly supply reports document careful rationing of critical items. Morphine limited to 0.5 cc per patient per 12-hour period, regardless of pain level. Plasma reserved for patients with blood volume loss exceeding 20%. Antibiotics restricted to wound infections unresponsive to sulfur treatment. Japanese nurses, accustomed to much stricter rationing, often expressed surprise at what British medical staff considered shortages. The food served to patients demonstrated these contrasting standards. British field hospital dietary records show standard patient meals included: breakfast, porridge with milk and sugar, 8 Oz, bread, 2 slices, margarine, 0.5 Oz, jam, 1 Oz, tea with milk and sugar. Lunch, stew with meat, 6 Oz, and vegetables, 6 Oz, bread, 2 slices, pudding, 4 Oz, tea. Dinner, soup, 8 Oz, bread, 2 slices, cheese, 2 Oz, fruit when available, tea. This regimen, providing approximately 2,800 calories daily, was considered barely adequate by British standards. Japanese nurses, familiar with their own military hospital diets consisting primarily of rice gruel, 10 Oz, twice daily supplemented with minimal vegetables and fish when available, approximately 1,100 calories, viewed the British austere rations as extraordinary abundance. Nurse Haruko Tanaka wrote, "The British wounded complain about the food. Our wounded weep with gratitude when given a full bowl of rice. Which army truly cares for its soldiers?" Medical evacuation procedures particularly impressed Japanese medical personnel. British field hospitals maintained dedicated ambulance units, typically 12 vehicles per facility, each equipped with morphine, plasma, and emergency surgical equipment. Patients requiring specialized treatment were evacuated to hospital ships anchored offshore, vessels containing full surgical theaters, X-ray equipment, and recovery wards. This systematic approach to casualty management contradicted imperial propaganda, claiming Allied forces abandoned their wounded. By October 1945, as formal demobilization began, many Japanese nurses had become effectively integrated into British medical teams. Captain James Whitfield noted in his final assessment report, "The Japanese nursing staff now function as colleagues rather than captives. They have absorbed British medical protocols, contributed valuable perspectives from their own training, and demonstrated that professional ethics can transcend even the bitterest enemy status." This medical rapprochement represents one of the war's few genuinely positive outcomes. Tea time, 3:30 p.m. 8th British Field Hospital Recreation Hall, November 1945. The ritual had become sacrosanct, a daily armistice in the midst of continuing medical crises. British nurses arranged chipped porcelain cups on metal trays, while Japanese nurses distributed precisely 2 biscuits per person. Outside, the war had ended, but patients still arrived with wounds, diseases, and the accumulated trauma of years in the Pacific. Inside this canvas-walled sanctuary, for exactly 30 minutes each afternoon, medical personnel from both nations paused to engage in a ceremony that had evolved beyond mere refreshment. Captain Eleanor Somerville, senior nursing officer, poured from a large aluminum teapot, ensuring each cup received exactly the same amount, a democracy of portions that still surprised her Japanese counterparts. The tea itself was nothing special. Standard army-issue black tea with the characteristic malty notes of Assam blends. Yet the Japanese nurses had developed specific preferences. Nurse Tanaka requested milk but no sugar. Nurse Yamamoto preferred 2 sugar cubes but no milk. Nurse Sato accepted both additions but only stirred 3 times counterclockwise, a personal ritual she maintained without explanation. These small particulars of taste, mundane in British society, represented revolutionary individualism to women raised in Imperial Japan's collective consciousness. The freedom to express personal preference, even in something as minor as tea preparation, constituted a microcosm of democratic values transmitted without propaganda speeches. When British personnel casually honoured these preferences without comment, they demonstrated a social system where individual choice carried no shameful weight. The biscuits accompanying the tea had become objects of particular fascination. Standard-issue McVitie's digestives, Huntley and Palmer's Bath Olivers, and occasional Peak Freen bourbons arrived in tin boxes bearing images of the British countryside. Japanese nurses studied these pastoral scenes: green fields, stone cottages, grazing sheep, landscapes entirely unlike their mountainous homeland or the war-devastated Pacific Islands. The tins themselves became treasured possessions, repurposed to hold sewing supplies, medical instruments, and personal keepsakes. Beyond the refreshments, tea time facilitated crucial cultural exchange. Sister Wellington had established a language practice where each day 1 medical term would be taught in both Japanese and English. Simple words at first: bandage, hotai, fever, netsu, pain, itami, expanding to more complex concepts: thrombosis, kessen, triage, sentaku chirio, shock, shoku. This bilingual medical vocabulary, documented in notebooks carried by personnel from both nations, would eventually form the foundation for post-war Japanese medical terminology reforms. The British Medical Library, housed in 2 footlockers, circulated among all personnel regardless of nationality. The collection included Garrison's Textbook of Physiology, Gray's Anatomy, British Pharmacopoeia, The Lancet, medical journal issues from 1943-1945, and various field manuals. Japanese nurses, trained in a medical system increasingly isolated from international developments during the war years, encountered research and techniques unavailable in imperial education. Nurse Miyako Ito devoted herself to studying advances in wound antisepsis, taking meticulous notes to share with colleagues upon eventual repatriation. Personal items shared during these informal gatherings gradually humanized former enemies. Lieutenant James Hopkins showed photographs of his Yorkshire home, his wife tending victory gardens, children playing with the family spaniel. Nurse Tanaka, after initial reluctance, reciprocated with a carefully preserved image of her parents standing before cherry blossoms in Kyoto. Captain Blackwood shared letters from his university mentor describing post-war reconstruction planning in London. Nurse Yamamoto eventually revealed poems she had written during battlefield retreats, which a British orderly with literary interests helped translate. These exchanges occurred against a backdrop of abundance that remained shocking to Japanese personnel. British Army Catering Corps records document the hospital's daily food allocations: 275 pounds of flour, 120 pounds of meat, 200 pounds of vegetables, 80 pounds of sugar, 40 pounds of dried fruit, 95 pounds of milk powder, 14 pounds of tea, and 32 pounds of chocolate when available. This supply fed approximately 600 people daily: patients, medical staff, and support personnel. The chocolate allocation particularly astonished Japanese nurses, who had not seen this luxury item since 1941. While considered austerity rations by British standards, these provisions created unprecedented dietary variety for Japanese personnel. The hospital mess served porridge with milk and sugar each morning, meat and vegetable stew at midday, bread with margarine and jam throughout the day, and tea with biscuits at regular intervals. This regime, providing approximately 2,700 calories daily, exceeded Japanese civilian rations by over 250%. Captain Blackwood observed, "Our Japanese colleagues initially saved portions of each meal, certain the food would soon be restricted. After 3 weeks, when abundance continued unabated, they began to trust that tomorrow would indeed bring another full meal." Recreation periods reinforced this cultural exchange. British personnel introduced card games, bridge, whist, and patience, which became particularly popular during evening shifts. Japanese nurses taught origami and brush calligraphy techniques. A volleyball court established behind the hospital hosted regular matches with deliberately integrated teams. Lieutenant Hopkins organized weekly film screenings using a 16mm projector. Charlie Chaplin comedies required no translation, while newsreels of European reconstruction provided glimpses of a world recovering from shared trauma. Christmas 1945 marked a pivotal moment in this cultural integration. British military tradition mandated Christmas celebration regardless of circumstances, a practice maintained through 2 world wars and colonial postings worldwide. The 8th Field Hospital received special holiday allocations: 25 pounds of dried fruit for puddings, 40 pounds of preserved meat for traditional roasts, 15 pounds of chocolate, and critically, 30 bottles of rum for wassail punch. Japanese nurses, most of whom had never encountered Christmas traditions, were fully included in preparations and celebrations. The contrast with Japanese military practices could not have been more pronounced. Imperial regulations had forbidden fraternization with foreign personnel under any circumstances. The concept of sharing celebrations with former enemies had no precedent in their training. Yet hospital records document full participation. Japanese nurses helped decorate the recreation hall with paper chains, contributed traditional origami cranes to the improvised Christmas tree, and performed folk songs at the evening gathering. Nurse Keiko Sato later wrote, "The British celebrate their victory by including the defeated in their joy." This generosity of spirit seems more powerful than any weapon they deployed against us. This cultural integration extended beyond hospital boundaries. When security protocols relaxed in November 1945, British medical teams took Japanese colleagues on supervised visits to local Okinawan villages, where reconstruction efforts had begun. Japanese nurses, having been told their American and British enemies destroyed civilian infrastructure without concern, witnessed instead systematic rebuilding, schools receiving priority, clean water systems established, medical clinics offering treatment to local populations. During these excursions, another form of cultural exchange emerged through trading. Japanese nurses bartered origami creations, calligraphy scrolls, and hand-sewn items for British chocolate, cigarettes, and stockings. This informal economy, operating outside official channels, established personal connections through mutually beneficial exchange. Medical Sergeant William Parker maintained a detailed ledger showing standard rates: 1 origami crane equaled 2 chocolate squares, a calligraphy name scroll traded for 5 cigarettes, a hand-embroidered handkerchief warranted a full chocolate bar. Psychiatric evaluation interviews, Temporary Allied Medical Headquarters, Tokyo, January 1946. Major Robert Thornton, specialist in combat psychiatry, reviewed his notes before meeting the next Japanese nurse scheduled for repatriation assessment. His office, formerly an imperial administrative room, still bore chrysanthemum emblems on the ceiling, symbols of an authority system now fundamentally altered. On his desk lay 43 completed evaluation files, each documenting the psychological transformation of Japanese medical personnel captured during the Pacific Campaign. The process unfolding in this room represented warfare's most unusual outcome. Enemies returning home as unofficial ambassadors for their former captors' worldview. "I can no longer recognize the person I was," Nurse Yumiko Tanaka stated during her third assessment interview. Major Thornton noted her posture: direct eye contact, shoulders squared, voice steady. Behavioral patterns incongruent with traditional Japanese female propriety, but consistent with the professional confidence displayed by British nursing sisters. "Before capture, I believed absolutely in imperial infallibility. I expected either honourable death or torture at British hands. Instead, I received respect, professional equality, and proof that everything we had been told about Western barbarism was fabricated. How can I return to Japan carrying this knowledge?" This question echoed throughout the repatriation process. Psychiatric assessments conducted between November 1945 and March 1946 document consistent patterns among 89% of Japanese nursing personnel who had experienced extended British captivity. Initial psychological profiles showed acute cognitive dissonance, characterized by persistent expectations of mistreatment despite contrary evidence. Mid-captivity evaluations revealed identity fragmentation as imperial indoctrination conflicted with observed reality. Final assessments demonstrated fundamental worldview reconstruction around core values of professional ethics, individual dignity, and evidence-based decision-making. Major Thornton's files contained meticulous documentation, diary excerpts, interview transcripts, behavioral observation logs, and psychological test results. Case Dr. 27JF, Lieutenant Haruko Nakamura, captured on Leyte in November 1944, showed particularly dramatic transformation. Her initial assessment recorded fanatical imperial loyalty, suicide attempt during capture, and categorical rejection of all Allied contact beyond name and rank. Her final evaluation, 15 months later, documented fluent English medical terminology, collaborative research on tropical ulcer treatment with British colleagues, and explicit rejection of imperial propaganda narratives. British authorities, recognizing the potential impact of these transformed medical professionals on occupied Japan, implemented specialized preparation programs. The Repatriation Readiness Protocol, established in December 1945, included 3 components: medical knowledge transfer, psychological preparation for civilian reintegration, and documentation of captivity experiences. Japanese nurses received comprehensive British medical manuals translated into Japanese, technical training on equipment likely available in post-war Japan, and certificates documenting their proficiency in specific procedures. The psychological preparation proved more complex. Captain Eleanor Williams, Women's Auxiliary Service psychologist, developed specific counseling protocols addressing reverse culture shock, the difficulty of reintegrating into a society whose fundamental premises one no longer accepted. Group therapy sessions focused on practical strategies: how to communicate new medical knowledge without challenging authority structures directly, how to maintain professional ethics within hierarchical systems, how to support patients while navigating occupation-imposed changes to Japanese medicine. The documentation component generated the most significant historical record. Each repatriated nurse created 3 documents: a professional medical log detailing techniques learned during captivity, a personal narrative describing their experience with British forces, and a comparative analysis contrasting imperial propaganda with observed reality. These materials, microfilmed for Allied intelligence archives, constitute the most comprehensive first-person account of ideological transformation under humane captivity conditions. Statistical analysis reveals the process's extraordinary effectiveness. Of 2,618 Japanese medical personnel who experienced extended British captivity, only 41 maintained rigid imperial ideology throughout. Approximately 78% underwent fundamental worldview reconstruction, characterized by rejection of imperial propaganda, acceptance of individual rights concepts, and professional identification transcending national boundaries. The remaining personnel demonstrated partial transformation, typically accepting British medical techniques while maintaining aspects of imperial social hierarchy beliefs. The material preparation for repatriation reflected British pragmatism. Each returning nurse received a standardized kit, 2 British Army medical manuals translated into Japanese, personal documentation of medical procedures mastered, 3 months' worth of basic medical supplies, bandages, sulfur powder, antiseptic solution, vitamin tablets, powdered milk, tea, and a small selection of English-language medical journals. These provisions, modest by British standards, represented unprecedented resources in defeated Japan, where medical supplies had dwindled to nearly nothing by war's end. Letters sent home during pre-repatriation processing reveal awareness of the challenges ahead. Nurse Michiko Yamamoto wrote to her family in Osaka, "I return to you transformed by strange experience. I have lived among our enemies and discovered they are medical colleagues first, British second. I have learned techniques that can save lives if I am permitted to practice them. I fear you will find me changed in ways difficult to understand. Please remember, I am still your daughter, though I see the world through different eyes now." The repatriation process itself operated with characteristic British attention to documentation and procedure. Each nurse underwent final medical examination, received complete vaccination series, and participated in 3 preparatory interviews. They signed multiple documents acknowledging their treatment under British custody, compared to Geneva Convention requirements. They received identity cards, repatriation allowances, typically $5 in occupation currency, and travel documentation. The administrative thoroughness itself demonstrated governance principles entirely unlike the chaotic final months of imperial administration. On February 15, 1946, the first major group of Japanese medical personnel boarded HMS Compassion at Yokohama for transport to provincial distribution centers. The ship, formerly a military hospital vessel, had been specifically allocated to medical repatriation. British nurses who had worked alongside these former enemies for months accompanied them through processing, maintaining professional relationships until the final transfer to Japanese civilian authorities. As the Japanese nurses disembarked at regional ports, many exchanged tearful farewells with British colleagues, an outcome inconceivable within their previous worldview. The occupation authorities, recognizing the potential influence of these returning medical professionals, established monitoring protocols. Intelligence officers conducted quarterly interviews with repatriated nurses during 1946-1947, documenting their reintegration experiences and professional activities. These records reveal both challenges and unexpected opportunities. Many nurses initially faced suspicion from communities still influenced by imperial ideology. Yet their practical medical skills, critically needed in devastated post-war Japan, quickly established their value regardless of political perceptions. Captain William Boyd, who supervised medical repatriation documentation, summarized the program's impact. "We captured enemy bodies, but ultimately transformed enemy minds. These women arrive prepared for death at our hands. They depart as professional colleagues, carrying not just medical techniques, but fundamental recognition that humanity transcends national boundaries. No artillery barrage could achieve what simple decency accomplished. These nurses, integrated back into Japanese society, will influence their nation's reconstruction more profoundly than any occupation directive could achieve." March 1947, Osaka Central Hospital. Nurse Yumiko Tanaka carefully unpacked the small wooden box containing items impossible to find in post-war Japan: real tea leaves, sulfur powder, rolled gauze, and 3 carefully preserved British medical journals. The hospital director watched with barely concealed astonishment as she arranged these treasures on the treatment room table. "You brought these from your captivity?" he asked, lifting a package of bandages with reverence appropriate for ancient artifacts. "The British gave them to me as professional supplies," she replied. "They called it a repatriation kit. Every nurse received one." The director shook his head slowly. "We have been told the Allies wish us to suffer, yet they send our nurses home with supplies our own military never provided." This scene repeated across Japan as approximately 2,100 medical personnel returned from British captivity between February 1946 and December 1947. Each carried not only physical supplies but transformative experience that would reshape Japanese medicine for generations. The Allied occupation authorities tracked these returned personnel through quarterly interviews that reveal their remarkable impact. Within 1 year of repatriation, 64% had secured positions in civilian hospitals, 22% joined newly established nursing schools, and 9% were recruited directly into occupation-supervised medical reconstruction programs. Tokyo Women's Medical College reopened under occupation authorities in April 1946. Incorporated 14 former military nurses with British captivity experience into its faculty. Their impact extended beyond technical knowledge. Professor Hiroshi Takahashi, who supervised curriculum development, noted, "These women brought entirely different teaching methodologies. They emphasized questioning rather than memorization, practical demonstration over theory, and remarkably, treated students as future colleagues rather than subordinates." This approach initially created tension with traditional faculty, but produced nurses with superior clinical abilities. The influence appeared most dramatically in reformed medical protocols. Osaka Prefecture Hospital records from 1948 document implementation of the British method for wound care, explicitly attributed to return nurse Michiko Yamamoto. This protocol, emphasizing frequent dressing changes, strict hand hygiene, and graduated responsibility for nursing staff, reduced post-surgical infection rates from 31% to 8% within 6 months. Similar adoptions occurred nationwide as repatriated personnel attained positions allowing procedural influence. Public health initiatives particularly reflected British influence. Nurse Haruko Nakamura, appointed district nursing supervisor in Nagoya in 1948, implemented community health screening programs directly modelled on British practices she had observed in Okinawa. Her quarterly reports to occupation authorities detail how she adapted British preventive care approaches to Japanese post-war conditions. With minimal equipment, we prioritize examination protocols that identify malnutrition and tuberculosis early. Precisely as Sister Wellington demonstrated with limited resources on Okinawa. Their efficiency in resource-constrained environments translates perfectly to our current situation. The transformation extended beyond medical techniques to fundamental ethical frameworks. Kyoto University Medical School archives contain lecture notes from a 1949 ethics seminar where 3 former military nurses presented case studies from British captivity experience. Their central thesis, that medical professionals owe primary allegiance to patients regardless of nationality, represented revolutionary departure from imperial military medicine. That this concept gained academic acceptance within 4 years of surrender demonstrates the profound influence these repatriated professionals exerted on Japanese medical philosophy. Japanese nursing education underwent particularly dramatic reformation. The traditional system, emphasizing obedience and technical execution without questioning, gave way to British-influenced approaches stressing clinical decision-making and professional autonomy. Formal surveys conducted by occupation authorities in 1950 revealed that 41 of 63 nursing schools had incorporated curriculum elements directly attributed to returning nurses with British experience. Basic changes included clinical rotation systems, evidence-based practice emphasis, and remarkably, the introduction of tea breaks, a seemingly minor cultural adoption that symbolized nursing as respected profession rather than subservient role. Statistical tracking demonstrates the scale of influence. By 1952, approximately 64,000 Japanese nursing students had received training influenced by British captivity nursing methodologies. When Japan regained independence that year, an estimated 27% of practicing nurses had been trained by instructors who experienced British medical systems during captivity. The generational transmission continued. By 1960, Japanese nursing textbooks incorporated specific procedures developed through Anglo-Japanese medical cooperation during occupation. The cultural transformation extended beyond professional practice to hospital social structures. Tokyo Metropolitan Hospital, rebuilt under occupation guidance in 1949, implemented a tea service for patients and staff explicitly modelled on British hospital practices. The hospital administrator, in quarterly reports to health ministry officials, noted, "The British tea ritual, introduced by our nursing director who experienced it during captivity, serves multiple functions beyond nutrition. It creates temporal structure in institutional days, provides psychological comfort to patients, and most importantly, establishes moments where medical hierarchy relaxes, allowing communication between ranks impossible in traditional settings." The linguistic legacy proved particularly enduring. The first standardized Japanese-English medical dictionary, published in 1949, was compiled primarily by repatriated nurses working with occupation medical authorities. This 417-page volume established terminology conventions still used in contemporary Japanese medicine. Most notably, it incorporated approximately 200 direct English loanwords for concepts previously undefined in Japanese medical language or described through cumbersome terminology. Common terms in modern Japanese medicine, shoku, shock, sutorisu, stress, trauma, entered standard usage through this dictionary's influence. The Anglo-Japanese Nursing Association, established in 1951 with occupation approval, institutionalized these connections. Founding membership included 172 former military nurses with British captivity experience and 43 British nursing sisters who had remained in Japan with occupation forces. The organization's charter explicitly stated its mission: to maintain professional relationships established during conflict and captivity, and to ensure medical knowledge exchange continues during peace. The association continues operating today, having facilitated over 4,000 professional exchanges between Japanese and British nursing personnel since its founding. Perhaps most remarkably, family histories reveal multi-generational impact. Oral history interviews conducted in the 1980s with children of repatriated nurses document distinctive upbringing patterns, emphasis on English language education, encouragement of female professional ambition, and household practices incorporating British elements. Most commonly, tea rituals and specific hygiene protocols. Approximately 31% of these children pursued medical careers themselves, with many explicitly citing their mother's captivity experiences as formative influence. Historians now recognize what occupation authorities documented contemporaneously: that Japanese nurses who experienced British captivity became vectors for fundamental societal transformation far beyond medical practice. Dr. Akira Hashimoto, in his definitive 1997 study, Medicine and Occupation, concluded, the approximately 2,100 Japanese nurses who experienced British medical systems during captivity ultimately influenced Japanese healthcare more profoundly than formal occupation directives. Through positions in education, hospital administration, and public health, they implemented not merely technical innovations, but fundamentally different conceptualizations of professional identity, patient relationships, and medical ethics. The nurses who had once begged for quick death became instead agents of profound healing, not only for individual patients, but for a medical system requiring fundamental reformation. The British soldiers who offered tea rather than execution had unknowingly deployed democracy's most powerful weapon. The demonstration that enemies could become colleagues, that professional ethics could transcend national boundaries, and that small kindnesses might ultimately accomplish what military might alone could not.